All right, let's jump right in, shall we? Jane Harper's The Dry. This book is a real page-turner. I'm especially excited to dig into these excerpts you found from some literary analysis on it. They really highlight why this book goes beyond just your average whodunit, you know.
It definitely isn't your run-of-the-mill mystery. Harper does a fantastic job of weaving in these bigger themes like,
Yeah.
well, you've got memory and isolation and the way communities work, especially in the context of the Australian outback.
So the crime itself is just the starting point. There's a whole lot more bubbling under the surface, so to speak.
Exactly. Think of the mystery as like a way to look at how people behave when they're under a lot of pressure. We follow this federal agent, Aaron Falk, who has to go back to his hometown, which happens to be in the middle of a terrible drought, for a funeral. And going back home means he has to confront some things from his past that he'd rather forget.
So his past is connected to the new mystery that he gets dragged into. Sounds like a recipe for some serious inner turmoil.
Oh, absolutely. Going back to Kiewarra, this small, isolated town is a catalyst. It brings up old wounds, old resentments. And what's really interesting is how Harper uses Falk's outsider status since he's been away for so long. It creates all this tension, and it allows her to explore these themes of belonging and alienation.
That makes me think about how, even in close-knit communities, there can be this underlying sense of suspicion. Especially when someone comes back after years of being away. It's like, do they really belong here anymore?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. That's definitely something going on in the dry. And Kiewarra itself is practically a character in the story. It has this harsh beauty, and then there's this relentless drought that affects everything and everyone.
The drought is more than just a setting detail, right? It feels like a pressure cooker. It forces the community's secrets out in the open, just like how the dry earth cracks. Is that something you picked up on from the excerpts?
Oh, definitely. The drought is like a metaphor for the emotional state of the town and all the people living there. It makes conflicts worse. It pushes people to their limits, creates this sense of desperation.
Speaking of the people, it sounds like Harper really gets into the nitty-gritty of what it's like to live in a small town.
She does. She paints Kiewarra as this place where everyone knows everything about everyone else. But not always in a good way. Long memories and simmering resentments create this atmosphere of suspicion, which makes Falk's investigation all the more difficult.
And with Falk being an outsider now, he's almost like a threat to this delicate balance the town has. It raises the question of whether you can ever really go back home.
Right, that's a big question, and the dry definitely explores it. And to add even more intrigue, Harper uses flashbacks to Falk's adolescence in Kiewarra.
The flashbacks make it feel like we can't trust what we're seeing. We're not always sure if we can rely on Falk's memories of the past. Makes you wonder how much our own pasts are colored by guilt or wishful thinking.
Exactly. These flashbacks to Falk's past show us this really tragic incident that he can't seem to shake. It makes you think about how reliable memory really is, how time and guilt can twist your perceptions. It adds this whole psychological element to the book, going beyond just the surface of the crime itself.
So we're not just trying to solve the current crime, but also piecing together what happened in the past. And even then, we're not sure what really happened. It's like a puzzle box with secrets hidden inside more secrets.
That's a great way to put it. Harper does a fantastic job of weaving together all these different mysteries, both past and present. And every time we think we're getting close to the truth, something else pops up and makes us question everything. She keeps you on your toes, that's for sure.
This reminds me of why I love psychological thrillers. It's less about the violence and more about the mental game, the manipulation. It's the slow burn of the suspense.
And the dry definitely has all of that. It's not just about finding out who did it. It's also about how secrets and lies affect people and whole communities. It's about how the past weighs on you and how it shapes who you become.
It sounds like a really insightful look at how people are, especially when they're under pressure. But it's also about resilience, isn't it? The people in Kiewarra have been dealing with this drought for years. I can't imagine how that kind of hardship would affect them.
You're right. The book explores that theme of resilience on a personal and communal level. They've had to learn how to adapt and survive in a really tough environment. Their strength in the face of that adversity is a really important part of the story.
And for Falk, going back to Kiewarra becomes this personal test of resilience too. It's not just the current mystery. He's also got to confront all these past traumas.
He's facing his own kind of drought too, wouldn't you say? Like an
Yeah.
internal one. All that weight from his past and going back to Kiewarra forces him to deal with it.
Yeah, it makes me think about those times when I've had to face a challenge and it ended up forcing me to deal with something deeper about myself. Is that something you see in Falk's journey?
Definitely. And what makes it even more interesting is that Harper doesn't make Falk out to be some perfect hero. He's got his own issues, secrets, things he's struggling with.
It makes him more relatable, right?
Yep.
Even if we haven't been through the exact same things, we can see ourselves in him.
Exactly. The excerpts pointed out how Falk has this duality about him. He's supposed to uphold the law, but he's also human. He's vulnerable, carrying around all this guilt.
It reminds us that even people in positions of authority are just people dealing with their own stuff. But let's go back to the setting for a sec. You said before how Harper uses the outback to add to the tension. It's more than just a pretty background, right?
Right. The outback, with its beauty but also its harshness, it really becomes a character in the story. It shakes the lives of the people in Kiewarra.
You know, the drought creates this constant pressure, this feeling of being trapped. It's almost like the land itself is closing in on them, like it's reflecting all the secrets and the tension that's brewing underneath.
That's a really great point. The setting becomes a reflection of what's going on inside the characters. And for Falk, with everything he's already dealing with, the isolation and the harshness of the outback must feel really intense.
It reminds me of a line from the excerpts. Harper describes the landscape as a vast, empty canvas, reflecting the emptiness within. Do you remember that one?
Yeah. That's such a strong image. It really gets across how the setting mirrors what's going on inside the characters, all this vastness surrounding them, but they still feel trapped by their secrets, by the past.
It feels like the landscape itself is holding its breath, waiting for something to give, maybe the truth or the mystery unraveling, or even Falk himself just breaking down. It's that feeling of tension that keeps you hooked.
That's it, exactly. Harper is so good at using the setting to keep you guessing. But even with all the darkness, there's this element of resilience too. Think about the people of Kiewarra. They've learned to survive in this really harsh place.
It shows how people can endure incredible hardship. There's this will to keep going, no matter what.
And Falk's journey becomes a symbol of that too. He has to face his demons, inside and out. And that process, even though it's painful, might end up helping him heal.
So we have this really complex character fighting his past, and it all takes place in this incredibly harsh environment. But there's also this glimmer of hope, the possibility that he can find redemption.
I think you've nailed it. The Dry is so much more than your typical crime novel. It's a deep exploration of what it means to be human, how we deal with trauma and loss, and how the past shapes us.
It's about facing those parts of ourselves that we want to keep hidden, our own internal droughts, you could say. Sometimes confronting those things is the only way to find peace, like in Falk's case.
And that brings us to something else really fascinating about this book. Some of the excerpts also talked about the way Harper uses flashbacks.
You mean the glimpses we get into Falk's adolescence? They're not just there for backstory. They have a much bigger purpose, don't they?
Absolutely. They create this sense of unease, of not knowing what's real and what's been changed by time and guilt. They make you question everything you think you know about the past.
It's like trying to put together a broken mirror. You've got all the pieces, but they don't show you the whole picture. And that makes Falk's journey even more interesting, you know? He's trying to figure out his past while he's also trying to solve this current mystery.
And those two timelines are constantly weaving together. They affect each other in ways that are subtle, but also really important. It's what makes the book so hard to put down. You keep trying to figure out how the past is connected to the present.
It's like we try to keep our lives in separate boxes, you know? The past over here, the present over there. But The Dry shows us that those lines can get blurred. The past is always there, influencing who we are and how we see the world.
That's a great point, and I think that's one of the big takeaways from The Dry. We can't escape our past, but we can choose how we deal with it. We can let it define us, or we can use it as a way to grow, to heal.
And it seems like Falk, even with all his problems and his struggles, he's choosing to try to heal. Going back to Kiewarra is his chance to deal with his past and maybe find some peace.
Exactly. And that's what makes his journey so relatable, so hopeful. Even in the most desolate places, there's always a chance for things to get better.
I like that. It really captures that theme of resilience that runs through the whole book. But hold on a second. Let's take a step back and think about what we've talked about so far. We've got this really complex main character, an amazing setting, all these layers of mystery, and these big themes of memory, guilt, and resilience.
And we've only scratched the surface. There's so much more to talk about, especially the way the outback affects everything and the deeper messages Harper is trying to get across.
Okay, I'm ready to dive even deeper. What's next? Okay, so ready to explore those deeper layers you mentioned. You know, the way the outback affects everything, the social commentary. Feels like there's a whole other side to the dry we haven't touched on yet.
There really is. One thing that's so striking is how Harper uses the outback, not just as a setting, but almost as a force that shapes the characters and their actions. It's as if the land itself is a witness to all their struggles, holding on to their secrets as tightly as they do.
Makes me think of that phrase, if these walls could talk. But in the dry, it's more like, if this dry earth could whisper, right? Does that come through in the excerpts?
Oh, absolutely. You know that part where Harper describes the wind going through the dry grass? It sounds like the town itself is sighing. It's subtle, but those details make the landscape feel alive, like it's another character in the story.
It's not just the physical landscape either, is it? It's the whole way of life in a small town like Kiewarra. Everyone's connected, everyone knows what everyone else is doing. Those social pressures must be a huge part of the story.
You're right. That's a big part of the social commentary Harper brings in. The excerpts talked about how she explores gossip and rumors. You know, how suspicion can spread so quickly in a small town, especially when they're all struggling because of the drought.
It's like the drought has created a lack of trust, too. When people are desperate, they're more likely to turn on each other. And that creates this perfect environment for conflict and misunderstandings. And for Falk, it must make his investigation even harder. He's not just dealing with the crime, but this whole web of relationships and hidden resentments.
Exactly. And because he's an outsider now, he becomes an easy target. The townspeople are already on edge, and Falk represents this disruption. It's easier for them to believe he's the problem instead of looking at their own role in what's happened.
Makes you think about how often we do that, don't you think? Project our fears onto others, especially people who are different or seem like a threat. Which brings us back to memory and how unreliable it can be. How much of what the townspeople think about Falk is actually true, and how much is based on old memories or grudges?
That's a great connection. The book really shows us how memory can be such a powerful thing, but also so unreliable. What we remember is often shaped by our emotions, our biases, even the stories we tell ourselves.
It's like that game Telephone we used to play. The message gets so distorted each time someone repeats it. And in the dry, those distorted memories have real consequences. They create suspicion and really drive the story forward.
And this is where Harper's writing is so brilliant. She manages to capture the beauty and the harshness of the outback, the complexities of a small town, and how fragile memory is.
It's so much more than a crime novel. It's a snapshot of this community, a reflection on memory and loss, and how powerful a sense of place can be.
Couldn't have said it better myself. The dry goes beyond any one genre. It gives readers so many things to think about long after they've finished the book.
I gotta admit, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed. In a good way, though. It's like we've peeled back all these layers and there's a whole universe of meaning underneath.
That's the beauty of a well-written book like The Dry. You can read it again and again and find something new each time.
So as we wrap this up, what do you hope people take away from our discussion? What's the biggest message The Dry leaves us with?
I think it's that even in the most difficult places, even in the most unforgiving environments, there's always that possibility of growth, of renewal, of finding your own sources of strength, like Falk confronting his past, or the people of Kiewarra finding strength in sharing their struggles. Even in all of that dryness, the book still offers a sense of hope.
Perfectly said. I feel like I've not only gotten a better understanding of the book, but also of how powerful stories can be.
It's been great exploring all of this with you.
Thanks to everyone for joining us on this journey. We hope you enjoyed digging into Jane Harper's The Dry with us. Until next time, keep reading, keep thinking.